Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn, and thanks for joining me on this episode where I get to talk to Aleks, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin.
That's right.
So I will briefly explain who Aleks is, and he can further explain who or what Aleks is. So Aleks is actually a very good friend of mine and my husband's. Husband Pat, he's on the show all the time. I can't keep him off my show apparently. But Aleks, we got to know Aleks online originally, and then he came and stayed at our house. He's a kettlebell guy, an all around awesome friend, a language enthusiast, and also here to talk to us today about anti-Semitism, which is just rampant in this world. And I keep seeing more and more of it online. I mean, my goodness, social media comments are just ripe with misinformation and weirdness. So anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Aleks, would you please explain who you are better than I probably could?
Sure. Well, actually, that was pretty good. I'm glad that you used my nickname of choice, the Hebrew Hammer. I am indeed a kettlebell and calisthenics enthusiast. I've worked as a trainer for a good many years. I lived in Israel for 4.5 years. And perhaps not surprisingly, that was a place where I experienced the least amount of anti-Semitism, or at least saw it. I've been very fortunate not to have actually experienced much face-to-face Jew hatred. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I live there currently. And growing up, I never really, I don't think really anybody said anything nasty about me for being Jewish, like really ever. Omaha is like a very amazing oasis in many ways because, as Christine pointed out, anti-Semitism is on the rise in a very big way all over the U.S., but also all over the world.
Yeah, I gotta say, we talked about this on Facebook Messenger the other day. I just assumed that after World War II, everybody's like, "Wow, anti-Semitism is a bad thing."
Like,
but I guess
we definitely should stop this.
Yeah, but I guess, and I've never heard it really growing up from other people. I grew up in the South, so there were prejudices that came about. Mm-hmm. And I heard it about African Americans and Hispanic because of just the South it's changed in the past 30 years, but sure, it had a long way to go when I first moved to North Carolina. But anyway, that's another story. But I never really heard prejudice. I was just surprised. And now the more online, especially on Instagram and Facebook, the more that I spend time on social media, the more these comments seem to be coming up. And that's why I wanted you to come on and we can talk a bit about anti-Semitism and what it is and why it's a problem.
Yeah.
As obvious as that may be to some people, it's not as obvious to others.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole lot to talk about when it comes to anti-Semitism, both ancient and modern. So where in particular should we begin?
I don't know. I'm going to defer to your good judgment. I mean, we have about 25 or 30 minutes. So I'm not sure if we can go way back and spend a lot of time, but you lead about 25 or 30 minutes. So I'm not sure if we can go way back and spend a lot of time, but you lead. I'll follow.
Yeah. Well, one thing that is very interesting to keep in mind is that I think, and this is in many ways, I think is almost more dangerous because it misrepresents the sources of anti-Semitism. The narrative, and by the way, I hate the word narrative because it's basically like a nice way of saying propaganda. But
it's funny. I was just thinking that yesterday because I found myself saying narrative in my head. I was like, I don't like that. Why did I just do that to myself?
I remember, I have a degree in English writing and linguistics, and I remember we used to talk a lot about narrative, but it was because it was like how things are being explained, like in writing. So it had like a useful term. I mean, it went a little bit beyond that, but it was never Nowadays, it really is just a replacement for the word propaganda. And one of the things we'll talk about is how people that would no longer be acceptable, so that they can say the same thing and get the same message across, but use plausible deniability when it comes to spreading anti-Semitism.
Sure.
But the narrative nowadays seems to be that white supremacy and right-wing nationalism is the first, last, and only source of anti-Semitism. And if you want to fight anti-Semitism, you have to fight that. And truth be told, there are actually, and I believe it was Deborah Lipstadt, who's a very famous Holocaust historian, who pointed out that modern anti-Semitism is almost unprecedented because it's coming from three sides. It's coming from the far right, the far left, and radical Islam. So it is not like it was in the past. For example, like, let's say, I'm not an expert on anti-Semitism, but my observation has been that whoever controls the culture controls the anti-Semitism. And at least it seemed to me that the people who are, let's say, maybe in the opposition or like the subculture or whatever, typically didn't necessarily hold these hardcore anti-Semitic beliefs, right? But nowadays it's like it happens on all sides, it's mind-numbing. But the crazy thing is, you hear like Bill de Blasio from New York. There's been a huge spate of anti-Jewish attacks, and we're not talking about people saying nasty things about Jews only, though that happens like on a daily basis and to their faces. But like physical assaults. There was this event in New Jersey recently where Jews were killed in a kosher grocery store. And you hear from people like Bill de Blasio, and Bernie Sanders that the white supremacy and white nationalism is the source of this resurgence of anti-Semitism. And nothing could be further from the truth, because while those are always going to be a problem, the fact is that they don't have wide support. It's mostly still underground. And people are going to be like, oh, what about Charlottesville? That's literally the only example anybody can come up with, like, truly. So it's not like these white nationalists and white supremacists all of a sudden, have caused like a huge ruckus all over the place, particularly not in the inner cities. There's I don't remember his exact role, but he's a head of some Jewish organization in New York, who said that the majority of the attacks on Jews in New York, he's not seen it coming at all from white supremacists. It's mostly coming from blacks, and of white supremacists is just not true. And if you really want to fight it, and there are very good reasons to want to fight anti-Semitism, regardless of your religious beliefs, namely that it is widely looked at as like a gateway sort of a hatred, or gateway racism. Like, you'll start off hating Jews, but it always ends up with other people getting in the crossfire as well. Like, it will end up being, my other minority groups. It'll end up being like religious minorities or ethnic minorities, but it starts with the Jews. So for leaders and people who have a huge platform and politicians to say that it's solely in the purview of right-wing nationalists, it's like saying, you go to a doctor and the doctor says, you have skin cancer on your arms and your legs. And you're like, well, I want to get rid of it, but I'm only concerned. You go to a doctor and the doctor says, you have skin cancer on your arms and your legs. And you're like, well, I want to get rid of it, but I'm only concerned about the right arm. You just have to take it off of that. Like, well, you're still going to have to deal with the skin cancer on the other parts of your body. And if you're not willing to do that, the cancer is going to take over. And that's exactly what we're seeing.
How much has it increased over recent years?
Well, that's a good question. There are statistics out there, I should say. I remember looking at the FBI statistics for, I think it was 2016 maybe. And so this was during Obama's administration, because again, Trump gets blamed for a lot of this stuff. But really, I don't think you could find a more pro-Israel or pro-Jewish president than Trump, regardless of what you feel of him, because there's plenty of reasons to criticize the guy, but you really can't criticize him on something like this. but 58% of the 58% of the attacks based on somebody's religious beliefs are aimed at Jews. So, and then next, the second place, I mean, that's not exactly an award and anybody's open to get, but second place is, I think, 27% for anti-Muslim attacks. So think about how big of a gap there is between the attacks on Jews and the attacks on Muslims. Now, I think that obviously the attacks on both Jews and Muslims should be dead zero, right? But we are often told that Islamophobia is a huge, huge problem, whereas in reality, if I'm not mistaken, Jews make up a smaller portion of the population of the U.S. than Muslims do, but they make up nearly double the amount of hate crime attacks based on their religion, their ethnicity, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I'm going to say there was a report done recently now, excuse me, where racial tensions have actually decreased during Trump's administration. So we can't just say it is because of him.
Well, that's great, because racial tension is stupid and should go all the way away. So a reduction is awesome. Yeah.
So you said before that it's a gateway, kind of a gateway prejudice. I feel like anti-Semitism and possibly bashing Catholics are probably the two acceptable prejudices left in America, it seems like. And you don't hear about either of them.
Right. You know, I think people bashing Catholics and Christians, the difference between that and the way that they bash Jews is that when they bash Catholics or other Christian groups, they do it. They can just say it outright. They'll say, that they don't like, they'll make fun of Christians and make fun of Catholics, or they'll say all sorts of nasty, they'll make fun of Christians and make fun of Catholics, or they'll say all sorts of nasty things, but they don't use a different word for it, or they don't pretend that they have to, well, I'm not a bigot, but
yeah,
say it. And
I'm about to say something incredibly bigoted when you say,
right. And it's funny is that, they would never consider saying that about other religious groups, because they look at Christians. I mean, and Christians are obviously the majority religion in the United States. But they also know that they're not going to get their butt kicked, for saying something like that, because most of them, even people who do something like really, I think like obscene, like in the 90s, there was an art exhibit, I think in the Met in New York of, and I almost didn't even want to describe it. It was Jesus on the cross, and then it was like covered in urine or something like that. Ugh. And they, like the star and the crescent, like the Islamic symbol, or anything of any other religion, because it would be viewed as being hateful. But you can do that to Christians because, by and large, you know that you're not going to have to fear for your safety. And I think that it's really unpleasant. But what you see with Jews in particular is that, I think I'll say this, I think that it's one thing to have a criticism of somebody's beliefs and still be friendly and personable and not be rude to the person. Because you can disagree without being disagreeable. But a lot of times what we're seeing with the anti-Semitism in particular is that they use different words, and then they use for Jew, and then they use the exact same anti-Jewish tropes that they've always used. So, I mean, a great example would be for instead of saying like the Jews, I've got the Anti-Defamation League did an international survey of anti-Semitic attitudes in the Americas, Western and Eastern Europe, Middle East and North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and Oceania. And the results are pretty astonishing. In total, like 1.09 billion people around the world hold some sort of anti-Semitic attitude. And for example, some of the tropes would be, for example, Jews are more loyal to Israel than the country that they live in, or Jews have too much power in the business world, or too much power in international financial markets. But a lot of times what you'll hear, and this is especially true on the far left, because the far right doesn't try to, they don't try to say, well, we don't hate Jews, but they just say it, right? But the far, we don't hate Jews, but they just say it, right? But the far left will say stuff like, instead of saying, Jews have too much control over global affairs, which is a common anti-Jewish trope.
I've seen that lately.
Yeah, they'll say Israel has too much control over global affairs, or Zionists have too much control over global affairs. And so they'll use words that, like, it's like, exactly what they're talking about, and they can't plot, because, for example, there are lots of Arab Israelis. I mean, 20% of Israel is Arab, and many of them hold a very high level positions, like the governor, or not the governor, pardon me, the guy in charge of, I think, Bank of Israel. Maybe it's not Bank of Israel, but one of the major Israeli banks is Arab Israeli. They're not talking about Arab Israelis have too much control over global affairs or too much control over the United States government. They're talking about Jews, like saying, I don't hate Ireland, I just hate the Irish. I'm sorry, I don't hate the Irish, I just hate Ireland. Like,
but who makes up Ireland?
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, nobody would ever buy that. Like, or if you said, look, some of my best friends are Irish, but they just have way too much control over global affairs, or they talk way too much about what happened during the potato famine. Like, you'd be like, come on, like,
we know what you're saying.
Out for the Irish.
Well, how is it then? I mean, the Jewish people account for such a minor part of the entire world population. Why did they get blamed for so much? Too much power in Hollywood or the banking industry, or why is this happening? Where did this come from? Do you know?
Well, a lot of it is, I mean, there's no question. If you go back in time, you'll find a lot of the anti-Semitism was religious. There's no question. If you go back in time, you'll find a lot of the anti-Semitism was religiously oriented, and both on the side of Christianity as well as Islam. And this isn't to say that all Christians or Muslims, held these beliefs against the Jews, but that was the excuse for it, and they would, back it up in whatever the way they wanted. But like anything, people make a decision on something, and then they emotionally, and then they back it up with logic. What's really interesting, actually, is that it's not all. It's not easy to describe, because, for example, there were a great many leaders in the Christian world who blamed Jews for killing Jesus, or blamed Jews for all sorts of other things. Meanwhile, Voltaire, who hated the church, blamed the Jews for their role. Okay, now on the other side, you've got, let's take a look at the United States or other parts of the West. The capitalists, and I want to see the capitalists, actually, because I think capitalism is great. So this isn't like, and it's also not an ideology. It's a type of market. But the right wing and typically the nationalists would say the Jews are communists and they had a hand in creating communism. This is all their fault. Whereas in the Soviet Union, Jews were accused of being capitalists and selling out the Soviet Union to the capitalist dogs in the U.S. So no matter what your ideology. Oh, here's another great example. Actually, this is perfectly recent. Like, there's all sorts of excuses for why Palestinians hate Jews, and not all of them. Obviously, I'm not thousands of people being like, no, so obviously not all of them, but saying, well, if Israel weren't, and I'm doing finger quotes, occupying Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank. By the way, the term Jew comes from Judea, where the Jews come from. So, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to say that they're occupying land where, that bears their name, or where their name actually came from. But nevertheless, saying, well, if the Jews weren't there, people wouldn't hate them, right? Whereas we see the same thing that happened in New Jersey. So in New Jersey, some black nationalists, black Hebrew Israelites, who, by the way, don't have anything to do with Judaism. It's a completely different movement, but they killed Jews, and you get people online saying, well, they're upset about gentrification of the area. So it's like, where can Jews live? They're not supposed to live in Israel, according to some of these people. They can't live in the inner city. Like, pretty clear. It's that you can come up with any reason or no reason to hate and kill Jews, or look the other way and rationalize when Jews get killed. And nobody really bats an eye at it. And I wish I could tell you why it continues, but like the origins are from ancient days, and the continuation of it is something that really, the mind boggles. They just come up with, people will come up with any excuse or no excuse to hate Jews and rationalize why they deserve to get killed.
Sure. Yeah, I will say that of course, the Catholic Church has had anti-Semites in it, and still does, I'm sure, throughout the ages. But the official position of the Church is to respect the Jewish people. And Jesus was a Jew. Most of the New Testament was written by Jews. Jesus came for the Jews. He is the, so it's to say in any way that the Church actively promotes anti-Semitism is completely untrue. Just that's a side note. And also, also to say, well, Martin Luther was part of the Catholic Church for a long time in his own life, but he was an anti-Semite. So unfortunately, he broke away. But but everybody knows of his name, and he was obviously associated with the Catholic Church before he broke away. So you have bad apples in a generally inclusive or respectful bunch of people. So.
Right. And, I think the Catholic Church deserves a big hand for what they've done to really make it very clear that they don't want, that they want to have better relations with the Jewish people, like in I believe it was 1967 during Vatican II. One of the things that they brought up was in what's called Nostra Aetate, which repudiates the idea that Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus. And in 1994, they even went so far as to say that they hold Judaism to be the elder brother of the church. Right. So the Catholic Church really has done a lot and deserves credit for it. And I know that there are other Protestant churches that have also tried to distance themselves. Now, I think the ones that, in my correct opinion, are going to have a very hard time distancing themselves from is the Lutherans, just because Luther he actually didn't start off as a crazy anti-Semite. In fact, in the early days when he was a part of the Catholic Church, he wrote things like, one of the things he wrote was, if I were a Jew and I were treated the way that some of the Christians treat the Jews, I would rather be a pig than be a Christian. And he was very outspoken in saying that the Jews need to be treated properly and they need to be treated fairly. What really seemed to be and this seems to be the case with other religious leaders throughout history, but what really seemed to be the turning point for him is, I think what he thought basically was that the Jews just didn't know any better, and and that their religious beliefs were based out of ignorance. And if they were taught, then they would certainly convert to Christianity. Not really, which is, a very hollow look at Judaism and Judaism's beliefs. So he went to go speak to I think it was the chief rabbi of Worms in Germany, and tried to convert him to Christianity, only to find that, the rabbi he left in a huff. And, it was after that he really started to write some of the nastiest things ever written about Jews. And in fact, his works were very popular amongst the Nazis. The average person probably would not have had contact with Luther's writings, just because most people aren't probably reading. Think how many Catholics read, the Catechism. You might say,
unfortunately, not a lot.
Exactly, right. So not a lot of people are probably reading what he wrote, but the Nazis used it. Some of the stuff that he wrote about, he said that rabbis should be prevented from teaching on pain of death, that synagogues should be burned to the ground, and that Jews who would do attempt to teach Judaism should have their tongues cut out, I believe is one of the things he said, that they should be enslaved and forced to do hard labor. If this sounds familiar to something that happened about 500 years later, it should, because one of the worst books he wrote was called Von dem Juden und ihrer Lügen, which means On the Jews and Their Lies. And that was one of the most commonly cited screeds against the Jews that was used in German nationalism and by the Nazis in Germany in the 30s and the 40s. So I have to say, like, it's really shameful. And I know that I don't ascribe these beliefs to most modern day Lutherans, but I don't know how anybody could say that they would want to be a part of a movement founded by a guy who believed this with like every bit of his heart.
Right. Yeah, that is problematic because it trickles down in some respect somewhere. It doesn't disappear completely from your history.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice or resources, ideas for people who are looking to explore more about this and what they can do to fight anti-Semitism?
Well, one of the things would be to know what it is when you hear it. And I think the other thing is to keep in mind that a lot of people seem to have this idea that anti-Semitism is basically like, at least the people who hold these anti-Jewish beliefs, almost none of them think they're anti-Semites. Like I was watching a clip of an interview with Cenk Uygur, he's a progressive, and I normally don't agree with this guy on anything, but he was interviewing David Duke, who was the former Grand Wizard of the KKK, and to his credit, he was really putting Duke's feet to the fire and Duke, he's not like the brightest, he's not that bright, but he said is like, oh, Jews are taking over the Supreme Court, and he's like, okay, there are like 2 Jewish Supreme Court justices, the rest are almost all Catholic. So why aren't you saying the Catholics are taking over the Supreme Court, right? Like, but the craziest thing, because he was citing Duke was citing all of this information, whatever. But one of the things that he said that I thought was just nuts, because he's without question the most famous anti-Semite in the U.S. David Duke is. I believe he said he's not anti-Semitic. Now, this is the problem, is that like people who are the problem never think they're the problem. But people who are, I think the English used to have a saying that anti-Semitism is only hating the Jews more than is necessary. And it's somewhat tongue in cheek, but given Britain's history. But one of the big things is that a lot of the people who hold these beliefs, they'll say like, look, when I was 17, I had somebody tell this to me, like right to my face, a liberal, somebody who claimed he was a liberal. I don't think it's a very liberal belief, but he said, well, you have to admit, the Jews do have a lot of power in the media. And I was like, who? Rupert Murdoch, who's not a Jew, or Ted Turner, who's not a Jew, or, Roger Ailes, who I don't think is a Jew. Like, all the people who really control the media are not Jews. And it's like, then who are you referring to? And they never have an answer. It's just like, well, there's a lot. It's crazy. But it's completely absurd. I mean, never mind the fact that like one Jew involved in anything doesn't somehow make all the Jews complicit. The fact is that's all they need to repeat a trope like this and say, look, I don't hate Jews, but Jews do have a lot of power in the business world. Okay, well, who in particular? I don't know. Like they never know. So I'll leave you with this. Who in particular? I don't know. Like they never know. So I'll leave you with this. There are a couple of very common anti-Jewish tropes, and I mentioned a few of them earlier. And you don't have to be lining up to shove a Jew into an oven to be an anti-Semite. And willingness to accept or believe in some of these things uncritically doesn't really help your case. And I think that most people, statistically in the U.S., most people do not believe this. In fact, in the U.S., according to this ADL survey, there's only about 9% of people who hold like even one anti-Jewish belief. Contrast that with Eastern and Western Europe, where it's significantly higher, and the Middle East, where it's like 74%. So the U.S. is doing pretty well for the most part. And so when you see this uptick in anti-Semitism in the U.S. and it looks bad, just consider like how like on the edge of their seats the Jews, with, for example, one good example is Jeremy Corbyn, who is, again, another guy who doesn't think he's an anti-Semite, but he's friends with terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and hobnobs with Holocaust deniers. And this is a left-wing person. This is not some crazy right-winger. There was a survey done that said that, like, I think 40 to 50% of Jews in Britain said that they would seriously consider leaving the country. That's 150,000 people, because there's 300,000 Jews in Britain. said they would leave if he got elected. So, and given the general direction politics is going in Europe, where it's a lot of it's going to the populist far right, which, I mean, they have no problem saying that they hate Jews. Things aren't looking good for Jews in Europe, and I don't expect there are going to be many left in 20 years. They will have all left here, and you can replace the word Jew with Israel, Zionist, settler, but
Take your
Jews
pick,
are more loyal. Yeah, Jews are more loyal to Israel than to the countries that they live in. Or Jews have too much power in the business world, too much power in international financial markets, still talk too much about what happened to them in the Holocaust, don't care what happens to anyone but their own kind, have too much control over global affairs, have too much control over the United States government, think they're better than other people, have too much control over the global media, are responsible for most of the world's wars, and people hate Jews because of the way Jews behave, which is classic blaming the victim for being a victim. That's something that doesn't just happen to the Jews, but it is particularly commonplace thought nowadays in the minds of many people in Europe, even in countries like Germany, where they should know better. I think something like 44% of nowadays in the minds of many people in Europe, even in countries like Germany, where they should know better. I think something like 44% of Germans polled said that they could understand why people would hate Jews based on Israel's policies, for example. So it's the mind boggles. But if you want to learn more about it, the Anti-Defamation League has a lot of good information. They're, I would say, the leaders and people who are studying this phenomenon. The Simon Wiesenthal Center would be another good one. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance would be yet another one. And these are good sources for learning about anti-Semitism, its current proliferation, and they're unbiased in that they don't try to pin it on just one group of people. They call it out everywhere they see it, which is the only way to fight it.
Right. And I will piggyback on that to say, if anybody's interested in Viewpoint Catholic Answers, if you just search Catholic Answers Anti-Semitism, they have a list of points of why we can't try to blame Jews for anything that happened to Jesus or anything like that, and that as Catholics we need to respect, like you said, our older brother in faith.
Yeah. Can I say one last thing?
You sure can.
Here, a little bit of a joke to add a little bit of comic relief here. So there's a common joke among the Jews in Nazi Germany that a guy's walking on a street and he sees is a Jewish guy walking on the street. He sees a Jew reading Der Stürmer, which is one of the most hate-filled anti-Jewish newspapers ever. He's like, what are you doing reading that? Like, they say the worst possible things about us. Like, what's gotten into you? And he goes, man, I read our newspapers and it's all the same. We're powerless, we're weak. We're weak. The armies of darkness are closing in on us. Like, our days are numbered. But I read Der Stürmer, and we run the banks, we run the governments, we have all this power, we have all this money. Like, it's just a much nicer read than what we're reading. And really, I think it's a great example of Jewish resilience in the face of hatred. And it could very well be, I don't know, one of the reasons why Jews are so good at comedy is that they're able to find something funny to laugh at in the face of things like this. So if you have a Jewish friend, tell them that joke, provided I'm sure they'll have a good sense of humor about it. Like, I'm guessing they may have even heard it before, so they may just politely listen. But that's a good one because it really does highlight the absurdity of these anti-Jewish claims.
Yeah, every trope that you just said, I have seen this week.
I believe it.
And just like random, it was a few random posts. I'm like, where is this evolved into? Blaming the Jewish people, and I was like, where did we come from this?
There was a guy, I kid you not, I don't remember his name right now, but he was, I think, a politician somewhere in D.C. who claimed that the Jews controlled the weather.
Oh, well, it's kind of cold here today, so if you could help. I'm
going to send warm weather your way, Christine.
Thank you. It's actually going to be in the 40s in a couple of days, so I'll thank you for that when I see it. Yeah, but I will say, one thing that you helped along my own conversion journey from skeptic to Catholic, because as the listeners won't know this, but you know, you do, that you came and stayed with Pat and myself for a few months And that was during the time where I was starting to read the Old Testament. And I don't know if you were cringing at the thought of coming downstairs, and I was waiting for you with my sticky notes of questions.
I was always happy to answer. I only feared like having to be like, gee, I don't know well enough. But I think I did an okay job.
It was great. It really was. So if anybody can find someone who is more versed in the Old Testament than you are to live in your house for 6 months and answer a bunch of questions, I highly recommend it.
I think it was 4 months. Had it been 6, you would have been a real scholar.
But yeah, it was great because I had all these questions that I never really looked at the Old Testament before. And so it was wonderful to be able to bounce these questions and get answers rather than me just, trying to search around the internet to find things that could have been.
You could end up on a thread where people are like, the Jews are controlling the climate. And, so you went to somebody who was going to sift through all that stuff.
That's right. I'm my resident expert. Bingo. Well, thank you for talking about this on the podcast today. I really do appreciate it. And I hope it's helpful. Bingo. Well, thank you for talking about this on the podcast today. I really do appreciate it. And I hope it's helpful for people, because I think you're right. You hear these things, so it's just like, well, I'm not racist, or I'm not a bigot, or, I'm not a chauvinist, and then the next thing that comes out, you're like, wow, that is exactly what you just said you weren't. Right.
Well, I think people forget that but basically means ignore everything I just said.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but yeah.
Exactly. But not sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, not sorry.
Exactly.
Well, okay. I will put I'll put a link in the show notes to the ADLs, and just so that people can click and go. But thank you again.
Thank you for having me
on. And then if anybody wants to learn anything about kettlebells and calisthenics from Aleks, alexsalkin.com, right?
That's right. I can also send you another link. I'm I haven't upped in there, but I have a daily email list. So if you like to get fit, and I typically keep it a little bit, there's a lot more levity than, a discussion about anti-Semitism. So you'll enjoy the emails.
Levity, not brevity. Wait, no, that's not right. Never mind. I thought I thought you don't go for brevity, do you? You like to
not
chit
really,
chat for a bit.
Actually. Yeah. I'm a little, you might've noticed, I'm a little long-winded, but the emails tend to be pretty brief. It's not going to take you 30 minutes to get through them. But I do have a 8-week kettlebell and body weight challenge, which has been very popular over the years. Free download to get you on my email list. And if you think that my wit isn't as funny as your other favorite Jewish comedians, you're more than welcome, of course, to just unsubscribe. But that would be where you would get the best contact with me.
Well, that's good. And I'm going to put this up in the next week or so. So if anybody's making New Year's resolutions, you're the guy to go to.
There you go.
As we get into the 2020 extravaganza at the gym.
Bingo.
All right. For anybody listening, I'll put all the links in the show notes that we've talked about today. And if you have any questions or comments, you can find me at Christine at thecatholicmama.com, or go to thecatholicmama.com, and there's a contact form there, and you can send any questions, any follow-up questions for Aleks even, or comments. You can put those there. All right. Until next time, everyone. Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children, or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy to understand grown-up answers, the pared down but not talked down answers you can share with your kids.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.